The lights in the cantina were dim, casting long shadows across the metal tables. Commander Zethkar sat alone in the corner, his 4 arms wrapped around a cup of fermented kelp wine. The drink was his 3rd one that evening, but it did little to wash away the memories that haunted him every day. Haven's Rest was supposed to be a peaceful place. The space station floated in neutral territory where different alien species could meet without fear of war. Traders came here to sell their goods. Diplomats came to make deals. Veterans like Zethkar came to forget. The Vrexani warrior was not young anymore. His once bright blue skin had faded to a dull gray. The proud warrior markings on his forehead were barely visible now, scarred over from too many battles. His compound eyes, which could see in multiple directions at once, were clouded with age and pain. Each of his 4 arms bore deep scars from weapons that had tried to kill him over the years. Around him, the cantina buzzed with quiet conversation. A group of Centaurian merchants argued over shipping prices. 2 Arcturian pilots shared stories about dangerous asteroid fields. A lone shard being sat perfectly still, its crystalline body reflecting the colored lights from the bar. Zethkar paid them no attention. He had seen enough different species in his lifetime to last him several more. He had fought many of them too. Some he had defeated. Others had defeated him. But there was one species that still made his hands shake when he thought about them. Humans. The cantina door hissed open and a young man walked in. He was tall and thin, with short brown hair and nervous eyes. His clothes marked him as a diplomat from Earth. The human looked around the room carefully, as if he was searching for someone specific. Zethkar noticed the human's gaze stop on him. The young man's eyes widened slightly, as if he recognized something about the old warrior. After a moment of hesitation, the human walked over to his table. "Excuse me," the human said in careful galactic standard. His accent was thick but understandable. "Are you Commander Zethkar of the Vrexani Empire?" Zethkar looked up at the human, with all 4 of his compound eyes. The young man was maybe 25 Earth years old, which was barely an adult by most species standards. His face was open and honest, but there was something in his expression that reminded Zethkar of himself when he had been young and eager for glory. "I was Commander Zethkar," the alien replied in his deep, rumbling voice. "Now I am just Zethkar. What do you want, human?" The young man shifted nervously from foot to foot. "My name is Jake Morrison. I'm a diplomatic attaché with the Terran Colonial Administration. I was hoping I could ask you some questions." Zethkar waved one of his primary hands dismissively. "I do not give interviews. Find someone else to bother." But Jake did not leave. Instead, he pulled out a chair and sat down across from the veteran. "Please, I'm not looking for an interview. I just want to understand something." "Understand what?" Zethkar asked, though he was already beginning to suspect what the human wanted to know. Jake looked down at his hands, then back up at the alien warrior. "I want to understand why every species in the galaxy looks at us the way they do. Fear, respect, something else I can't name. I've been to 12 different worlds in the past 6 months, and it's the same everywhere. The moment people find out I'm human, everything changes." Zethkar studied the young human's face. There was genuine confusion there, and something that looked like pain. The alien veteran had seen that same expression on the faces of young Vrexani soldiers when they first learned the true cost of war. "You really do not know, do you?" Zethkar said softly. "Know what?" The cantina seemed to grow quieter around them. Other patrons had noticed the conversation between the human and the scarred Vrexani warrior. Some moved to tables farther away. Others leaned in to listen. Zethkar took a long drink from his cup and set it down with a heavy thud. "You want to know why we look at you that way? You want to know why your mere presence changes everything?" Jake nodded eagerly. "Very well," Zethkar said. "But know this, young Jake Morrison. What I'm about to tell you will change how you see your own species forever. Once you hear these words, you cannot unhear them. Once you understand what humans really are, you will carry that knowledge for the rest of your life." The human swallowed, hard but did not back down. "I need to know." Zethkar signaled to the bartender, a a six-armed Rigelian, for another drink. The bartender brought over a fresh cup of kelp wine and a glass of water for Jake. The alien veteran waited until the bartender was gone before he spoke again. 15 years ago, I commanded a battlecruiser in the Vrexani Imperial Fleet, Zethkar began. I was younger then, proud and strong. I had fought in 17 major campaigns across 9 different star systems. I had defeated enemies that could phase through solid matter. I had broken armies of machines that could calculate the future with perfect accuracy. Jake listened intently, his water glass forgotten in his hands. The Vrexani Empire had conquered 47 star systems. Over 3 centuries, Zethkar continued. We were the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen. Our warriors were trained from birth. Our technology was advanced beyond measure. Our strategies had been perfected through countless victories. The alien veteran's voice grew quieter, forcing Jake to lean forward to hear him. Then we encountered humans. The words hung in the air between them like a weapon waiting to strike. At first we thought you were just another primitive species, Zethkar said. We had studied your military history through intercepted transmissions. We knew about your ancient wars, your weapons, your tactics. Our war planners analyzed everything from your World War II to your resource wars of the 22nd century. Jake's face was pale now. He could sense something terrible coming. We concluded that humans were moderately organized but lacking in true warrior spirit. Zethkar continued. You seemed predictable, limited by your emotions, weak because you cared too much about individual lives. The alien veteran lifted his cup and stared into the dark liquid inside. We could not have been more wrong. Outside the cantina's large viewing windows, stars moved slowly past as the space station rotated. Ships of various sizes and designs docked and undocked from the station's many ports. Trade continued. Life continued. But inside the cantina, at one small table in the corner, a terrible truth was about to be revealed. You want to know about human wars, young one? Zethkar asked, his compound eyes focusing on Jake with frightening intensity. Then sit back and listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you is why every species in this galaxy fears your kind, even when you come in. Peace. Zethkar took another sip of his kelp wine and stared out at the stars beyond the cantina window. Jake Morrison waited patiently, his hands folded on the table. Around them, other patrons had grown quiet, sensing the weight of the story that was about to unfold. The first time we saw humans in battle, Zethkar began, was in the Kepler 442 system. It was supposed to be a simple operation. We had done it hundreds of times before with other species. The alien veteran's forearms moved as he spoke, gesturing to help tell his story. The system had 3 planets, only one was inhabited by humans. Maybe 50,000 people lived there, mostly farmers and miners. They had a small defense force, 20 fighters, 2 patrol boats, nothing that could threaten a real military. Jake felt his stomach tighten. He knew what was coming would not be pleasant. I was not the fleet commander then, Zethkar continued. That honor belonged to Admiral Vex Thule, a warrior with over 200 years of experience. He had conquered 12 star systems for the Empire. He knew how these operations worked. The alien paused to drink again, his compound eyes distant with memory. The plan was standard. We would jump into the system with 30 ships. The humans would see our fleet and understand they could not win. They would surrender. We would occupy their world, add it to the Empire, and move on to the next system. But that's not what happened, Jake said quietly. No, Zethkar replied. That is not what happened at all. The veteran leaned back in his chair, his scarred face showing old pain. When we arrived in the system, the human defense force did exactly what we expected at first. Their fighters launched immediately. Their patrol boats moved to intercept us. Their commander, a female called Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster, sent us a message. Zethkar's voice changed as he tried to imitate the human accent. This is Colonel Foster of the Kepler Defense Force. You are not welcome in this system. Leave now or we will be forced to defend our home. Jake could picture the scene in his mind. a small human force facing an overwhelming alien fleet. Admiral Vexthul found this amusing, Zethkar continued. He ordered his communications officer to respond. The admiral told the humans they had 1 hour to surrender unconditionally or be destroyed. The alien veteran's hands tightened around his cup. Colonel Foster's response was immediate. She said no. Just no? Jake asked. Just no. No surrender, no negotiation, no fear in her voice, just a simple refusal to give up her people. Zethkar shook his head slowly. Admiral Vexthul gave the order to attack. Our ships moved forward. The human fighters came straight at us. 20 small ships against 30 large ones. We expected them to use hit-and-run tactics. We expected them to try to delay us while evacuation ships escaped. The veteran's voice grew quieter. Instead, Colonel Foster ordered her pilots to do something we had never seen before. She told them to ram our command ships. Jake's eyes widened. Ram them? Fly their fighters directly into our largest vessels. Suicide attacks. They gave up their lives to damage our fleet and create openings for their civilian ships to escape. Zethkar set down his cup with shaking hands. Pilot after pilot flew straight into our ships. They did not hesitate. They did not ask for another way. They simply obeyed their commander and died for their people. The alien looked directly at Jake. Do you understand what this meant to us? We had fought crystalline beings who could become invisible. We had battled machine intelligences that felt no pain, but we had never encountered an enemy that would sacrifice trained pilots so readily. Jake felt sick. He could imagine young men and women his own age flying their ships into enemy vessels, knowing they would die. 7 of our ships were damaged, Zethkar continued. 3 were destroyed completely. All 20 human fighters were lost, but they had given their evacuation ships time to escape. Most of the civilians got away. The veteran paused, lost in thought. After the battle, Admiral Vexthul called a meeting of all ship commanders. I was there as captain of the cruiser Blade of Conquest. The admiral was troubled by what had happened. Zethkar's compound eyes focused on the distance. He said the humans had fought like madmen. He said no rational species would waste trained pilots like that. He called it desperate and stupid. But you didn't agree, Jake said. No, I did not. Something about the way Colonel Foster had spoken bothered me. There was no desperation in her voice, no madness. She had made a cold, calculated decision to trade her fighters for civilian lives. The alien veteran took another drink. I told the admiral that the humans had not acted from desperation. They had acted from strategy. They knew exactly what they were doing and why. Zethkar's expression grew darker. The admiral dismissed my concerns. He said one battle meant nothing. He said humans were like all the other species we had conquered, weak and emotional. The veteran laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. We pressed our advantage. Over the next 6 months, we conquered 3 more human colonies. Each time it was harder than the last. Each time the humans fought with more skill and better coordination. Jake leaned forward. What changed? Everything changed. The humans did something no other species had ever done before. They learned from every defeat. They studied our tactics after each battle. They adapted faster than we thought possible. Zethkar's 4 arms gestured emphatically. Within 6 months, human ships were using modified versions of our own shield technology. Within a year, they had improved our designs and made them better than the originals. The alien veteran's voice grew filled with a mixture of admiration and fear. But that was not the terrifying part. The terrifying part was how quickly they learned to think like us and then think beyond us. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. I began to study the human commanders who fought against us, Zethkar continued. Captain Roy Bennett at the Battle of New Geneva. Major Lisa Torres during the siege of Prosperity Station. Each of them seemed to know what we would do before we did it. The veteran stared into his cup. At first, we thought they had better intelligence gathering. We thought they had spies in our fleet or technology we did not understand. But that was not it. Then what? Was it? Jake asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. Zethkar looked up at the young human diplomat. They had learned to understand us. Not just our tactics or our technology, but our psychology. They knew how Vrexani commanders thought. They knew how we would react in different situations. They had turned war into a science. The alien veteran finished his drink and signaled for another. That was when I began to realize that we were not fighting an ordinary enemy. We were fighting something that treated every battle as a lesson, something that got stronger with each defeat. Jake sat in stunned silence, processing what he had heard. "But you still thought you could win," he said finally. Zethkar nodded slowly. "Yes. We still thought superior numbers and technology would be enough. We still believed that humans were just another species to be conquered." The veteran's new drink arrived and he took a long sip before continuing. We were about to learn just how wrong we were. Jake Morrison watched as Zethkar stared into his fresh cup of kelp wine. The alien veteran's 4 hands were trembling slightly now. Around them, the cantina had grown even quieter. Other patrons pretended to focus on their own conversations, but Jake could feel their attention on the table where terrible truths were being revealed. The war entered its 2nd year. Zethkar continued, his voice lower than before. By then, Admiral Vexthul had been replaced. The Empire's high command was not pleased with our slow progress. They sent Admiral Krextoth to take charge of the campaign. The veteran took a small sip of his drink. Krextoth was different from Vexthul. He was younger, more aggressive. He believed the previous admiral had been too cautious. He wanted to end the war quickly with overwhelming force. Jake could sense that something important was coming. The new admiral gathered the largest fleet the Vrexani Empire had ever assembled for a single campaign. 300 ships, 50,000 warriors, enough firepower to destroy entire star systems. Zethkar's compound eyes focused on Jake. The target was the human colony world of New California. It was one of their most important planets. 2 million people lived there. It had major shipyards, military academies, and research facilities. The alien veteran paused, as if gathering strength to continue. Admiral Krextoth was certain that crushing New California would break human resistance. He believed that losing such an important world would force the humans to surrender. But that's not what happened, Jake said quietly. No. What happened was far worse than anything we could have imagined. Zethkar leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. The humans knew we were coming. They had been watching our fleet movements for weeks. But instead of running or preparing a desperate defense, they did something that still haunts my dreams. Jake waited, afraid to hear what came next. They turned New California into a trap. The veteran's hands gripped his cup tightly. When our fleet arrived in the system, everything seemed normal. The Human Defense Force came out to meet us. Their commander was Rear Admiral Patricia Stone. She had maybe 40 ships against our 300. Zethkar shook his head slowly. Admiral Krextoth was pleased. He thought the humans were making the same mistake as always, fighting when they should surrender. He ordered the attack to begin. The alien veteran took another drink before continuing. For the first hour, the battle went exactly as our admiral expected. Human ships were destroyed. Their lines were broken. Admiral Stone's fleet was retreating toward the planet. Jake could picture the scene. A massive alien fleet overwhelming the human defenders. But then something strange happened. Our ships began experiencing technical problems. Navigation systems failed. Weapons overheated. Shield generators shut down without warning. Zethkar's voice grew filled with fear. At first, we thought it was just bad luck. Equipment failures happen in battle. But the problems kept getting worse. More and more of our ships were affected. The veteran looked directly at Jake. That was when we realized the truth. The humans had not been fighting us for the past hour. They had been studying us. Studying you? Jake asked. Every shot we fired, every maneuver we made, every system we used. They were recording everything and analyzing it in real time. They had turned the entire battle into a giant laboratory experiment. Zethkar's compound eyes were wide with remembered terror. Admiral Stone had been feeding our ships false targeting data through hijacked communication channels. She had infected our computer networks with viruses designed specifically for Vrexani technology. She had been learning how our ships worked so she could break them. Jake felt his blood run cold. But the worst part was yet to come. Once Admiral Stone had gathered enough data about our fleet, she activated something the humans called the Prometheus Protocol. The alien veteran's voice was barely audible now. Every human ship in the system suddenly changed. They stopped retreating. They stopped defending. They became something else entirely. Zethkar paused, struggling to find the right words. They became hunters. The veteran took a long drink before continuing. The human ships moved like nothing we had ever seen before. They anticipated our every move. They struck at our weakest points with perfect accuracy. They coordinated their attacks like a single organism with dozens of bodies. Jake realized he was holding his breath. Admiral Stone had used the data from the first hour of battle to create detailed tactical profiles of every Vrexani commander in our fleet. She knew how each of us thought. She knew how we would react to different situations. She could predict our moves before we made them. Zethkar's hands were shaking more violently now. In 3 hours, the humans destroyed 200 of our ships. The greatest fleet in Vrexani history was reduced to scattered wreckage floating in space. The alien veteran looked up at Jake with haunted eyes. But Admiral Stone was not finished. She could have let the surviving ships escape. Instead, she did something that broke our spirits completely. Jake waited, knowing that whatever came next would be terrible. She sent a message to the remaining 100 ships in our fleet. She spoke in perfect Vrexani, not just the language, but our military codes, our cultural references, our way of thinking. Zethkar's voice cracked slightly. Admiral Stone told us exactly how she had defeated us. She explained every trick she had used. She described how she had analyzed our psychology and turned it against us. She gave us a complete breakdown of our tactical failures. The veteran stopped speaking for a moment, overwhelmed by the memory. Then, she made us an offer. She said we could surrender and be treated with honor. Or we could continue fighting and be destroyed ship by ship, exactly as she had planned. Jake felt sick to his stomach. Most of our commanders surrendered immediately, but Admiral Krextoth refused. He was too proud to accept defeat from humans. Zethkar took another drink with shaking hands. Admiral Stone sighed when she received his refusal. Then she began to hunt down the remaining ships one by one. She told each commander exactly how she was going to destroy them before she did it. She turned our deaths into lessons for her own people to study. The alien veteran's voice was filled with something between terror and admiration. Admiral Krextoth's ship was the last to be destroyed. Before she killed him, Admiral Stone sent him a final message. She thanked him for helping humanity understand Vrexani military thinking. She said his sacrifice would make future human victories easier and more efficient. Jake stared at the alien veteran in horror. That was when I truly understood what humans were, Zethkar continued. You do not just fight wars. You dissect them. You turn every battle into a learning experience. You study your enemies not just to defeat them, but to understand them so completely that you can predict their every move. The veteran finished his drink and set the empty cup down. After New California, word spread throughout the Vrexani fleet. Human commanders were not just military leaders. They were scientists studying the art of war. They treated each of us like specimens in a laboratory. Zethkar looked out at the stars beyond the cantina window. That was when fear began to replace confidence in our ranks. We realized we were not fighting an ordinary enemy. We were fighting something that got stronger every time it faced us. Something that turned our defeats into their victories. The alien veteran turned back to Jake. But even then, we did not understand the full horror of what humans could do in war. That revelation was still to come. The silence in the cantina stretched for several minutes. Jake Morrison stared at his untouched glass of water, while Zethkar gazed out at the distant stars. Other patrons had stopped pretending to ignore their conversation. Everyone was waiting to hear what terrible revelation would come next. Finally, Zethkar spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. The war should have ended after New California. Any rational military force would have retreated and negotiated for peace. But the Vrexani Empire was not rational. We were proud. The alien veteran signaled for another drink, though his hands were still shaking. The High Command refused to accept that humans had outsmarted us. They convinced themselves that Admiral Stone had simply been lucky. They believed that with better planning and more ships, we could still win. Jake looked up from his water glass. But you knew better? Yes, I knew better. After what I had seen at New California, I understood that humans were unlike any enemy we had ever faced. But I was just a ship captain. No one listened to my warnings. Sethkar's new drink arrived, and he took a careful sip. The Empire decided to make one final push to end the war. They gathered every available ship from across all our territories. Nearly 500 vessels, almost the entire Vrexani fleet. The veterans' compound eyes grew distant with memory. But first, they wanted to understand how Admiral Stone had defeated us so completely. So they did something that seemed reasonable at the time. They captured a human prisoner to study. Jake felt his stomach drop. He could sense that this was where the story would take its darkest turn. The prisoner was Admiral Frank Collins. His ship had been damaged during a raid on one of our supply convoys. Instead of letting him die with his crew, we took him alive. Zethkar paused, struggling with the memory. Collins was taken to our main military base on Vrex Prime. Our best interrogators worked on him for weeks, trying to learn human military secrets, but Collins told them nothing useful. He was a professional soldier. He knew how to resist questioning. The alien veteran took another drink. That was when Admiral Kate Phillips requested permission to try a different approach. Jake had never heard that name before, but something about the way Zethkar said it made him afraid. Phillips was not like other human commanders. She was younger than most, maybe 35 Earth years, but she had already earned a reputation for being able to predict enemy movements with frightening accuracy. Zethkar's 4 arms moved nervously as he spoke. Phillips came to Vrex Prime alone, under a flag of truce. She said she wanted to negotiate an exchange. Admiral Collins for some of our captured human civilians. The veteran shook his head slowly. Our commanders agreed to meet with her because they thought it would be a chance to study a human leader up close. They brought Phillips to the same facility where Collins was being held. Jake waited, knowing that something terrible was about to be revealed. Phillips spent 3 days at our base. She did not try to rescue Collins or gather intelligence about our defenses. Instead, she did something that still gives me nightmares. Zethkar's voice grew even quieter. She studied us. The alien veteran looked directly at Jake. Phillips observed how our guards moved. She listened to how our officers spoke to each other. She watched how our commanders made decisions. She learned our customs, our body language, our ways of thinking. Jake felt cold fear creeping up his spine. On the 3rd day, Phillips met with Admiral Collins. They spoke for only 15 minutes. Then she left our base and returned to human space. Zethkar took a long drink before continuing. We thought nothing had happened. Phillips had not rescued her officer. She had not learned any military secrets. She had simply wasted 3 days talking to people. The veteran's hands tightened around his cup. 2 months later, our final fleet moved against the human colony of New Texas. 500 ships against maybe 60 human vessels. It should have been a complete victory. Jake could guess what was coming, but he still dreaded hearing it. Human fleet was commanded by Admiral Phillips. Zethkar's voice was filled with terror. When our fleet arrived in the New Texas system, Phillips was waiting for us. She sent a message to our fleet commander, Admiral Kexaval. The alien veterans' compound eyes were wide with remembered fear. Phillips spoke in perfect Vrexani military protocol. She used our formal titles correctly. She referenced our cultural heroes and military traditions. She spoke like she had been born on Vrex Prime. Jake realized he was gripping his water glass. So tightly his knuckles were white. Then Phillips did something that broke our will to fight before the battle even began. Zethkar leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. She predicted exactly what Admiral Kexaval would do in the coming battle. Not general tactics, but specific moves. She told him he would try a pincer movement at coordinates she named. She said he would hold his heavy cruisers in reserve behind the second moon. She described his fallback positions if the initial attack failed. The veteran paused, overwhelmed by the memory. Admiral Kexval was furious. He thought we had a traitor in our ranks feeding information to the humans. He changed all his battle plans and ordered the attack to begin. Jake waited for the inevitable conclusion. Phillips had predicted that too. She knew Kexval would change his plans once she revealed them. So she had prepared for his new strategy as well. Zethkar's voice cracked. The battle lasted 6 hours. Phillips destroyed our entire fleet with minimal losses. But that was not the worst part. The alien veteran looked up at Jake with haunted eyes. During the fight, Phillips sent constant messages to our commanders. She explained what they were doing wrong. She suggested better tactics they could use. She treated the battle like a training exercise where she was the instructor, and we were her students. Jake felt sick. At the end, when only a few of our ships remained, Phillips offered to let them surrender. She said she had learned everything she needed to know about Vrexani military thinking. She thanked us for the education. Zethkar finished his drink and set the empty cup down with finality. That was when I understood the terrible truth about humans and war. You do not fight to conquer territory or capture resources. You fight to eliminate threats permanently. The alien veteran looked out at the stars again. Phillips had spent those 3 days on Vrex Prime, learning how our entire species approached warfare. She used that knowledge to defeat not just our fleet, but our ability to ever threaten humanity again. Jake sat in stunned silence. After New Texas, the Vrexani Empire sued for peace immediately. We had no choice. Phillips had proven that humans could predict and counter everything we might do in future conflicts. Zethkar turned back to Jake. But the most terrifying part was what Phillips told our peace negotiators. She said the war had been educational for humanity. She said humans would study our tactics and psychology to prepare for conflicts with other species who might think like us. The veteran's voice was filled with a mixture of fear and admiration. Do you understand now, Jake Morrison? Humans do not just win wars. You learn from them. Every conflict makes you stronger and more dangerous. You treat warfare like a science where each enemy teaches you something new. Jake stared at his reflection in his untouched water glass. That is why every species in the galaxy fears you, Zethkar continued. Not because you are stronger or have better weapons, but because you never stop learning how to fight more effectively. You turn every enemy into a teacher and every battle into a lesson. The alien veteran stood up slowly, his forearms supporting his aged body. Your people ended our war 15 years ago, young human. But you are still fighting it. Every military academy in human space studies what happened at New California and New Texas. Every new officer learns how Phillips broke the Vrexani Empire. Zethkar placed one of his hands on Jake's shoulder. You asked why other species look at humans with fear and respect. Now you know. You are not conquerors. You are something far more dangerous. You are evolution itself, constantly adapting and improving your ability to destroy those who threaten you. The veteran turned to leave, then stopped and looked back. Remember this conversation, Jake Morrison. Remember that you represent a species that has turned war into an art form. Other races see that in your eyes, even when you come in peace. They know that every human carries the potential to become another Admiral Phillips or Admiral Stone. Zethkar walked slowly toward the cantina exit, leaving Jake alone at the table. Jake sat in silence for a long time, staring at the stars outside the window. Ships of many different species passed by the station, their lights creating patterns against the darkness of space. Each one carried beings who knew humanity not as friends or enemies, but as something far more unsettling. They knew humans as the species that had made warfare into a science, and every peaceful contact a potential lesson in how to fight more effectively next time. Jake finally understood why the galaxy looked at his people the way they did, and the knowledge would stay with him for the rest of his life.